their world was only half of the story. On the other side of that great watery expanse was another world altogether. Before the year 1492, the world was, in many ways, two separate planets. On one side of a vast uncharted ocean was Europe, Asia, Africa. These lands were connected by ancient roads, bustling sea lanes. They traded spices, silks, ideas. They fought wars, shared stories. Great empires rose and fell. Religions spread across continents. People in this old world believed they knew the shape of the earth, but honestly, their maps were incomplete. They had no idea that an entire hemisphere, teeming with life and civilizations, lay hidden behind the curtain of the western horizon. Their world was only half of the story. On the other side of that great watery expanse was another world altogether. The Americas were home to millions of people. Great empires like the Aztec and the Inca had built magnificent cities that rivaled any in Europe. They constructed towering pyramids and engineered complex road systems through treacherous mountains. Countless other cultures thrived in diverse landscapes, from the frozen north to the dense Amazon rainforest. They had their own languages, their own beliefs, their own histories written in memory and stone. They lived in a world that was complete unto itself, unaware of the ships that would one day appear from the east. These two worlds developed in complete isolation from one another. The plants and animals were different. The Americas had corn, potatoes, tomatoes. Europe had wheat, horses, and cattle. The diseases were different too. For thousands of years, the peoples of each hemisphere had built up immunities to their local illnesses. This separation created a unique biological and cultural landscape on each side of the Atlantic. Christopher Columbus was a man possessed by a single powerful idea. He believed he could reach the East Indies by sailing west. Most experts of his day disagreed, not because they thought the world was flat, but because they believed the ocean was simply too vast to cross. They thought his calculations were wrong. But Columbus was persistent. After years of rejection, he finally convinced the Spanish monarch's Queen Isabella, King Ferdinand. In August 1492, 3 small ships set sail from Spain: the Nina, the Pinta, the Santa Maria. They slipped past the horizon, heading into a terrifying empty expanse known only as the Sea of Darkness. The journey was long and grueling. Weeks turned into more than a month. The sailors grew restless and afraid. They had never been out of sight of land for so long. Every day they stared at the same endless blue water, the same empty sky. Their food was spoiling. Fear began to turn into mutiny. The crew threatened to turn back, to abandon this seemingly foolish quest. Columbus had to use all his powers of persuasion and a few threats to keep them going. He promised them riches and glory. He begged them for just a few more days, insisting that land was near. Then, signs of life began to appear. A carved stick was pulled from the water. A branch with fresh berries floated by. Flocks of birds were seen flying southwest. Hope began to flicker once more among the weary sailors. The air itself seemed to change. It smelled of earth and vegetation. On the night of October 11th, the lookout on the Pinta cried out, "Tierra! Tierra! Land!" In the faint moonlight, they could see a dark line on the horizon. It was a small island in what we now call the Bahamas. They had not reached Asia, but they had stumbled upon something far more consequential. As dawn broke on October 12, 1492, Columbus and his men went ashore. They planted the flag of Spain in the sandy soil, claiming the land for their king and their queen. They fell to their knees and gave thanks to God for their deliverance. As Columbus and his men explored the beach, they were not alone for long. People emerged from the trees, drawn by the sight of the strange, massive ships that looked like floating houses. These were the Taino people, the native inhabitants of the island. They were curious and cautious. They had never seen men like these before, with their pale skin, their beards, their strange, heavy clothing. They had never seen metal weapons, or flags with unfamiliar symbols. From the Taino perspective, these visitors might have been spirits from the sky, beings from another realm who had arrived on winged canoes. Their world, so familiar and predictable, had just been turned completely upside down. Columbus, for his part, looked upon the Taino people with a mix of wonder and calculation. He described them in his journal as handsome, gentle, and peaceful. He noted that they had no iron weapons, only simple wooden spears. They were generous, willing to trade everything they had for the Europeans' cheap trinkets, glass beads, small bells. But even in this first encounter, Columbus was also assessing them as a potential source of labor. He saw them as simple people who could easily be converted to Christianity, and more importantly, subjugated to serve the interests of the Spanish crown. The seeds of conflict were sown in these very first moments of contact. The communication barrier was immense. When Columbus returned to Spain in 1493, he brought with him incredible stories. He also brought back physical proof of his journey. A few captive Taino people, colorful parrots, strange plants like tobacco, pineapple, and small amounts of gold. The news of his discovery spread like wildfire across Europe. It was first carried by letters, then by word of mouth, and amplified by the newly invented printing press. Pamphlets describing the voyage were printed and distributed in cities across the continent. People were captivated. The idea of a whole new land populated by unknown peoples fired the European imagination. It was the biggest news story of the century. The discovery fundamentally changed how Europeans saw the world and their place in it. Their maps were suddenly obsolete. Their understanding of geography, their understanding of humanity, their understanding of God's creation was thrown into question. Before 1492, the Americas, a continent of incredible linguistic diversity, over 1,000 different languages, spanned from the Arctic to the tip of South America. Each language held a unique worldview, a library of stories, a deep connection to the local landscape. These were the original voices of the Americas, but the arrival of Europeans began a dramatic and often brutal linguistic transformation. Spanish conquistadors, South Central, Portuguese conquistadors, South Central, their languages began to dominate. Indigenous languages were suppressed. Many vanished along with their speakers further north. Different European powers arrived. French colonies, what is now Canada, French colonies. The Mississippi River Valley Dutch settled New Amsterdam. English colonies along the Atlantic coast. Each settlement became a linguistic island. The stage was set for a linguistic battle. The rise of English was not inevitable. Wars, treaties, relentless westward expansion. England defeated the Dutch. England defeated the French. England took control of their territories. English gradually became the language of government, commerce, and power. History is not just a collection of dates and facts. It is a series of powerful cinematic moments that reveal the human heart. Imagine the scene on that first morning. The Taino people stepping silently out of the dense green jungle. 3 wooden ships larger than anything they could have conceived rest in the bay. Their faces, fear, awe, pure curiosity. Armored Spaniards wade ashore, helmets and breastplates gleaming. They kneel on the sand and plant a large colorful flag, a silent collision of 2 timelines frozen in our collective memory. Think of the spread of news back in Europe, a crowded port in Spain. A ship arrives with strange, colorful birds. A printer in a dusty German workshop hastily sets type for a pamphlet. Ink stains his fingers as he works, small human moments that became engines of massive change. On the surface, peaceful exchange. Beneath it, a deep, tragic misunderstanding. For the sailor, the bell is a trinket to get gold. For the Taino man, the bell is a marvelous sound. The events set in motion on that October day in 1492 are not distant history, they are the bedrock of the world we live in today. The story of Columbus's arrival is the origin story of the modern Americas. It explains why the continents are named the Americas after another Italian explorer, Amerigo Vespucci. It explains why Spanish is the dominant language in Mexico, Central America, South America. It explains why Portuguese is spoken in Brazil. It explains the presence of Christianity as a major religion throughout the hemisphere. The world we inhabit was forged in the aftermath of that momentous encounter, and its legacy is all around us. This story still matters because it forces us to confront the complex and often painful nature of our history. The discovery of the Americas was also an invasion and a conquest. It led to the founding of new nations built on ideals of liberty and opportunity. It also led to the destruction of ancient civilizations. It led to the deaths of millions of indigenous people from disease and violence. It led to the creation of immense wealth. That wealth was often built on the backs of enslaved people. To understand the Americas today, we must look at both the triumphs and the tragedies. Moments of heroic exploration, moments of brutal exploitation. The story of 1492 is also the story of the greatest biological exchange in human history. It is called the Columbian Exchange, plants, animals, technologies. Ideas began to flow between the old and new worlds. Horses, cattle, wheat came to the Americas. Potatoes, tomatoes, corn traveled to Europe, Asia, and Africa. Our diets, our economies, and our very DNA were reshaped by this exchange. Ultimately, this epic story is our story. Diverse peoples from Europe, Africa, the Americas came together, often under tragic and violent circumstances to create something entirely new. The languages we speak, the foods we eat, the governments we live under, the identities we claim are all echoes of that fateful moment in 1492. Understanding this history is not just about looking at the past, it is about understanding who we are and how we came to be, right here, right now.